Welcome to Deep Transformation, Self-Society Spirit. I'm Roger Walsh, and our co-host is John Dupuy, author of the award-winning book, Integral Recovery. And our guest today is Dr. Laurel Parnell, who is one of the world's foremost EMDR, that's eye movement desensitization reprocessing, therapists. She is not only a psychologist and a therapist, but one of the world's foremost EMDR trainers. And in addition, has written several books on this topic. The first one, Transforming Trauma, EMDR, the Revolutionary New Therapy. And after that, some of the key ones have been Rewiring the Addicted Brain, an EMDR-based treatment model, and Attachment-Focused EMDR, Healing Relational Trauma. In addition to all this, Laurel is a very deep spiritual practitioner. He's done years of intensive practice in a variety of traditions, most notably probably some of the Hindu practices, the non-dual work, and guides appropriate clients through the spiritual openings that can occur in EMDR. And that's one of the things we want to explore in particular today, just how this therapeutic approach can open people to very profound transpersonal experiences. I can speak from personal experience here because I've been working with Laurel for some 20 years. 20 years ago, I've been teaching, of course, the psychotherapy courses at the University of California for psychiatrists there. And, I knew the literature on psychotherapy pretty well. When I ran across the EMDR literature with its remarkably rapid improvements in trauma symptoms, I was blown away, and I figured I need to try this. And by good fortune, I was able to get into Laurel's practice and to work with her, and have continued to request consultations periodically ever since. And in my own experience, some of those consultations have led to very deep spiritual openings, which I'm very grateful for. So, Laurel, it's a gift to have you here and have the chance of exploring these topics. Perhaps we can begin with, not everyone's familiar with EMDR, of course, so maybe you can tell us exactly what it is.
So EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, was developed by Francine Shapiro, who was a Bay Area psychologist back in the 80s. And what she stumbled on was the power of alternating bilateral stimulation. And she found it with eye movements. So the idea with EMDR is that we activate the memory network where the trauma is stored, with the image, the emotions, the body sensations, and any of the beliefs that got locked in at the time of the trauma. And then we add alternating bilateral stimulation. In the early days, it was all eye movements, and we've gone beyond eye movements for over 20 years. So initially it was eye movements. And what that seems to do is the activation of the memory network and then the adding of the bilateral stimulation sets off a rapid processing effect. So thoughts, feelings, body sensations, information begins to rapidly process through the nervous system. It's really a mind-body free associative process. And what we find is that you move towards health and wholeness. So what's been held in a kind of dysfunctional way, that with erroneous thoughts and feelings like, this belongs to me, this is who I am, you keep feeling like the memory is still present, it's still alive. It moves it to what Jean Klein called objective memory. It feels like it happened in the past. It no longer feels connected to you. It feels like you're reading about it in the newspaper. So it really has this global perspective. So what it does, so EMDR, traditional EMDR, is a trauma therapy that works to help the mind and body rapidly process information that's been frozen in time, taking us to what we call an adaptive resolution, or taking us to health and wholeness. So that's kind of there's protocols, there are procedures, there are ways of doing this. And of course, this was developed in the 80s we've evolved it over time. And so your experience of it is in kind of an evolved form, obviously, but it's highly researched for PTSD. It's one of the most researched therapies for post-traumatic stress disorder, highly efficacious, and it's just amazing. So I've been teaching this since 1995 and practicing and using it, and it's still just so wonderful to be able to help people.
So it's interesting that that what seems to have been discovered with EMDR is a way of more rapidly processing experiences. And in some ways, this is a refinement of what psychotherapy and contemplative practice is about. So much of what they're both about is bringing awareness to that which has not been fully experienced previously. And what EMDR seems to add with its bilateral stimulation is something which tends to speed the resolution of particularly unprocessed, painful materials. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think there's a humanistic psychology theory that underlies it, that we have a natural healing system that's been disrupted by the trauma experience, and that it freezes the information in fragmented form, so to speak, unintegrated, unprocessed form. And that the addition of the bilateral stimulation allows that information to become unlocked and move towards health and wholeness. So it's profoundly integrative. So a lot of therapies have similar theories, but what we find in EMDR is that it works on a mind-body very rapidly. So all kinds of information that is locked in ways you never would have thought, because our theories really trap us. When you have theories about something, you're creating constructs, and oftentimes what we find are things are associated and linked in ways you never would have thought of in a million years. So it gets at these underlying things and allows them to rapidly move out. So EMDR clears what isn't true. So this is kind of coming back to, I have a very strong Buddhist foundation. So in Buddhism, we have a sense of a true self, and our true self is that which is ever present. And the expression of our true self is love and compassion and joy and wisdom, these kind of essential qualities. And my view is what happens is that when we have a traumatic or experience, let's say, it creates clouds that obscure our expression and our knowing of our true self. And what Jean Klein, one of my teachers, would say is the ego is a contraction in the mind and the body. You feel it. It's like a holding, a contraction in the mind and the body. So what we do with the EMDR is we look for where those places are that are contractions, these places of holding, and we light them up. And then we add bilateral stimulation, alternating eye movements. It can be tapping. It can be anything that stimulates both sides of the body or the brain. And what happens is it moves it out. So that which is in true self clears out. Hatred, anger, fear, sadness, these kinds of things that are like the clouds move out. And always where we end up is this expression of true self, which is joy and love and a free flow of energy, compassion. And so you can't remove something that's true, but that which isn't part of true self just gets stronger, eliminates. And so we're always looking, and this is my view of EMDR, this is how I do it based in this perspective, is I'm looking for the places of holding. Where are those clouds still? Where are they located? Is it a body sensation? Is it a construct, a belief of some kind? And then we focus on those places, and they evaporate like the clouds that are obscuring the sun. And it's just amazing. So really the role of the therapist is to align with and resonate with the true self that is within the client, at the same time intuiting and recognizing where the blocks are, and then finding where those places are and allowing them to unfold as they will. This is kind of my view. This is my transpersonal way of working, as you know. It's more like that.
One of the I trained also to be a therapist and back in the day, and one of the discouraging things was that we learned that through analysis or psychotherapy, you could uncover the subconscious material that was causing the pain, and a lot of work, and that's good to know what's ailing you is a good thing, but it wouldn't integrate it, it wouldn't heal it. So you could do all this work, and I think there are some benefits in it, but it just didn't quite take it far enough. And this is, boy, I wish we would have known about it then. And I've had friends that were in school with me that have used it in their practice, been using it for years, and swear by it. So
it really changes it. And in a way, what our theories and our talk therapy, which are useful, of course, because they kind of give us a mapping. We're allowed to, we're putting words to experience, that kind of thing, but they don't get at this deeper level of these places that are holding. And EMDR very rapidly moves them out. And what's been so interesting over the years is clients and I will have our ideas about what something will be associated with. And we go in, and it has nothing to do with what we think it is. So I hold theories and concepts and all of that very lightly. And then we discover what really is, underneath it. And more often than not, it's really a surprise. For example, we're always looking for these big traumatic experiences that are then linked to present day symptoms and problems. And there are all kinds of what we call small t traumas, being hurt in childhood by a friend, being small bullying experiences, misunderstandings that can also go into our nervous systems in really dramatic ways that begin to create a negative self-construct, and a harmful self. I'm not good enough. I'm a loser. Whatever these things are, but they may not be linked to things our parents did to us. They could be all kinds of things. And so what happens in the work is we discover what in the past is linked to whatever it is, and we process it with EMDR, and out all this stuff disappears. And stuff that's been held for a lifetime, is gone, and the person is living in this very free, fluid way without the constraints of these old beliefs, but they weren't connected to big stuff. Often they're connected to little stuff that you would never find in a history, because they weren't noted as really significant. So this is the fun of what we do with this. To me, it's really open-minded discovery of what it is that's creating these blocks to living fully for the individual.
That certainly makes a lot of sense. You're reminding me of a couple of things. First, a beautiful quote from Carl Jung, that learn your theories as well as possible, but set them aside when you come in contact with the living soul.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's one of the implications of what you're saying, that our theories, our concepts, and of course contemplative traditions would agree with you. Theories have their role, and one needs to get to the either preconceptual or transconceptual experience, direct experience, to actually affect transformation for the most part. And I'm also struck by what you said about the unpredictability. And I think that's one of the joys of depth psychotherapy, that you never know what's going to come out. And I would say, perhaps in my own experience, having been through a number of therapies and gained significantly from them, I think that's one of the things that really stands out about the EMDR work, that it really can take you within a single session to places you had no idea you were going to go. And it seems like in your work, what I take from both your writings and my personal experience of you, that much of the way you operate is based on a very profound trust in the psyche. Could you talk to that?
Well, I think, it's interesting because it's an embodied trust. It's not a conceptual trust. And I think it's in large part due to my clinical experience. I was trained in 1991. I've been using this extensively in my practice since that time. So I have thousands of sessions. and as well as my own personal EMDR. So when I was trained back in 91, I was blown away by how powerful this was. And it was like, oh my gosh, all the therapy done in the past, kind of like I have the map of what's down there, but none of it has really changed how I feel inside. That kind of the behavioral kind of structural part hadn't really shifted. And I had no idea how to do that. So getting my own EMDR was profound because it really allowed me to learn what that is from the inside out. And then working with people over the years, you just see that you drop into, I think it's, who called it kind of don't know mind, that mind of not knowing, of being comfortable with not knowing. And Alan Watts called it the wisdom of insecurity, right? I love that because it's really, there's wisdom in not knowing and being comfortable with not knowing and allowing the process to unfold. And frankly, Roger, I think it takes a certain personality of a therapist to be comfortable doing this work.
Yeah.
Because you let go of control and knowing, and you drop into the trust of process, and you align with the wisdom inherent in the client. And you ride, some of it is super intense. You kind of ride the waves of a big affect. You go in these kind of, it's almost like journeying with somebody, but you've got yourself very grounded in the present as you're aligned with that, and you ride through it. And I don't know how I'm going to arrive at the place of wholeness, but I trust that we'll get there. And so there's something about that. And I think when people watch me work, I've got a whole series of demonstration videos of working live with people that we have on our, on our website, and we show and we use them for teaching purposes. You see the kind of embodied trust of process. And I think it's from lived experience of session after session after session, going in and going, I have no idea how we're going to get through this. Working with somebody who's had some of the most horrific childhood sexual or physical abuse experiences and thinking, how are we going to get through this one? And not knowing, but I don't have to know. I know that I can be present in the moment and I can ride through this. And also I can stay open to my own intuition. And I think this is part of that what's important in any good therapy is the right brain to right brain connection between therapist and client. And that's also where your intuition opens up. And it's also where meditation practice is so important. So, basic sitting practice of opening to big space, of coming to your body, recognizing what's arising in consciousness. All of that is so open and so important. And it also opens your intuition. So you can notice when something arises in intuition and, do I ask a question? Do I follow this? And so it allows for more of this smoothness. Okay, I think we're stuck. I'll check in with the client and then I'll ask, what do they need? And then we'll find a way to unhook something. So I think the opening to intuition, to being present in your own body, the therapist, is really important. So much of that comes back to the importance of basic spiritual practice for the therapist to be really good at this. I mean, you can learn the basics of EMDR and you can work with some things, right? But to work with the vaster stuff, the spiritual stuff, the deep childhood trauma stuff, I think the more the therapist has done their own personal work, their own EMDR work, their own meditation practice, it just opens them to a whole broader skill set and a way of being able to be present with people.
That makes total sense. And of course, if you look at the psychotherapy outcome research, it's very clear that the most important factors by far in most psychotherapy are first, the quality of relationship, and second, the personal qualities of the therapist and the client and what they bring to the therapy. And for most therapies, and here EMDR may be an exception, for most therapies, those are way more important factors than the particular techniques that's used. And we've had decades of internecine warfare between psychoanalysis, behaviorism, cognitive therapy, etc., all claiming to be the one true way, or at least many of their adherents claim it to be the one true way. And yet that's not what the research shows. And you're pointing to the very important idea, which unfortunately is not widely known yet within the therapeutic community, though it's beginning to, is that there are ways of cultivating the very qualities such as empathy, sensitivity, intuition, etc., that are so central to being a good therapist. And it's possible to cultivate them through contemplative practice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was going to say in preparation for this conversation, Laurel, I went to YouTube and I found an example there of you working with a woman. And it's about 5 minutes, it's not very long, but immediately I was impressed, although this woman's good, because you had such empathy, intuitive intelligence. You were right there, and you could tell because it had two cameras, it was showing her and you, that she felt really safe and being held. And as you mentioned, that seems to be an essential part. And yeah, you got there. And one of the other insights of looking into this, it's so kind of not amazing, but it's just so life affirming, and our practice, our depth practice and work affirming that when you work through, however this integrates, it's all kind of a mystery. I mean, you can have theories about it, but it works, that qualities of essence, which Hamid or H.H. almost calls it, begin to emerge, of love, compassion, joy, just by doing this work, and they come of themselves. That tells you a lot about our deeper human nature.
I think it does. And so I came to EMDR 1991. I was trained by Francine. And I immediately began to have these experiences in my own experiences, as well as with my clients. And they were having transpersonal experiences right and left. It was just naturally unfolding. And I wrote an article for the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology, really outlining what I was seeing and experiencing. And then at the time, I was teaching at California School of Integral Studies. And I began to teach EMDR in the doctoral program there. I did that for 2 years. In 1995 and I think 1996 or 7. And one of my students from that class then decided to base his doctoral dissertation on the article that I wrote. And he queried other EMDR therapists to see if they had also noticed the kind of transpersonal experiences I had written about in my article. And yes, many of them were reporting very similar experiences. They were things like, the most common experience is that of compassion for self and others. So the typical result of EMDR is compassion for self and others. It's like the heart opens, there's a sense of no longer identifying with what happened. And also the desire for revenge or anger or any of that just dissolves out. And so typically a client will arrive at what happened to me does not define who I am. And all this upwelling of self-love comes. Just wow. And it's a very common experience. And it's not something the therapist is directing the client to do at all. It just happens on its own, including what I call objective forgiveness. So, how do I put it? I'm not a fan at all of any kind of contrived, like you should experience this or you should forgive somebody, because I think it's phony. And then it really keeps a person from fully processing through all that they're experiencing and feeling. But what was happening was some people were arriving at forgiveness for the people who had harmed them. They had a non-sentimental kind of forgiveness. It was as you see things as they are, this broader context arises, and this sense of forgiveness would come. So anyway, Raymond Turpin was the name of my student, and he was finding many of the same things that I had written about in my article. but especially compassion for self and others. And I think that's quite extraordinary, isn't it? How many therapies, trauma therapies or any therapies, that is the typical endpoint of the therapy, is that.
Yeah, it's very rare. And gosh, there's a lot here. First off, just to acknowledge how rare, at least from what I know about therapy, and I've taught psychotherapy for a lot of years, how rare that as an endpoint of therapy is. There can be some forgiveness, some resolution, some coming to terms with, occasionally forgiveness, but often, and in some, I think you've written and would agree, some tragic cases, there's a sense of, okay, the person comes to feeling, moving from feeling like a victim to a survivor. That's the endpoint. Well, yeah, it's an endpoint, but it's not exactly as far as one can go.
No,
Yeah,
even a survivor, it's like what they arrive at is this is something that happened in my history that doesn't define me. It takes its place among all the things that happens in one's life. It's kind of like the lens gets very big and very broad, and you see that this is something that you've learned from, that's informed your life, that has affected you, but it doesn't define you. And that is a typical endpoint.
So, Laurel, a couple of what feel like really important questions here. You said certainly this has happened a lot in your work with people. And from the research project you talked about, sounds like it's happening with at least some other EMDR therapists. Do you have any idea of what EMDR therapists this happens with, and are there some that transpersonal spiritual experiences don't arise with?
This is such a good question, Roger, and I've really thought about it. I think the compassion for self and others arises universally, no matter what the background is with the EMDR therapist practicing. I think some of the other deeper experiences of dissolution of self and I think some of the bigger, you might say bigger experiences are affected, I think, and I don't have research to support this, by the quality of the therapist who's working with the person. So for example, if a therapist doesn't believe the person they're working with can really get over something, can really heal from it.
Oh yeah, that's fatal.
I watch this all the time in my training. So, we do trainings and we have practice sessions, and we will regularly see the therapist go, well, anger is a normal endpoint for this. You need your anger. Or, oh yeah, grief, you should be feeling grief. That's a normal, experience. And so what we'll find is the therapist is limiting the client because of their own limited experience, rather than say, well, let's just see if we can go a little further. Not, you've got to keep going. It's like, well, let's just see what else can happen if we keep going. Kind of this open inquiry, open curiosity, let's see. And I found people open to whole other bigger, broader dimensions because I've just said, let's see, let's keep going. So where I'll go, and the people in my institute, my other trainers and consultants will go, well, let's just see where we can go, not forcing them, but let's just see. Whereas other therapists who have their theories about what is possible, no, you can't do this. You can never heal from this, or they haven't themselves, so they won't allow their clients to keep going. So you'll see this. And then there's this whole other area of the multidimensionality that I've really been exploring the last 4 years. And this is where other things will start showing up. And this is where EMDR starts to blend with what we find in shamanic practices all over the world. So with EMDR, what we're doing is we're using alternating bilateral stimulation. So it can be tapping on the hands, it can be tapping like this, it can be auditory stimulation, it can be drumming. And so for some people, what happens is it opens the veil to altered states of consciousness. And they begin to have altered states of consciousness. So what I will say is I want to differentiate, if I can, between experiences that are really truly spiritual, where you open to who I am is not this conditioning, and you have a sense of pure consciousness, and you abide in that consciousness, and you feel filled with love and presence. So that's where EMDR, so what I'll say is what EMDR can do is it can clear the conditioning, and it brings us to our true self and this bigger consciousness that holds everything. But it also opens people to spiritual, transpersonal kinds of dimensions of reality. So many people will have after-death communications with loved ones. Suddenly the loved one is in the room, or somebody they've killed or who's died will be in the room with them, and they feel them communicating with them. Or they'll have a power animal show up, or an angelic being, or an ancestor, or there's so many other kinds of things that will show up. And if the therapist freaks out and goes, that's not okay, or no, you're psychotic, or it can't be your dead relative talking to you, this is just in your mind, this is going to shut it down. And people for millennia have been pathologized for having these kinds of experiences. So I think part of what happens for some people is the alternating bilateral stimulation acts very much like drumming and rattling does, where it can open these other dimensions. So these other kinds of experiences will start showing up. And it's like a portal will open up to these kinds of things. And this is where it's so important that therapists be comfortable with this and know how to work with this in a way that's not pathologizing to the client. And certainly, these things are not meant, sometimes these are like spirits that'll show up. They're not meant to be integrated. They're not ego states. Sometimes they're ego states, but sometimes they're not. They're energies. They could be from, it could be from so many different things. So this is where we're really opening different dimensions of reality in the use of bilateral stimulation that is known about for thousands of years, but EMDR is opening these things up. And like many, many years ago, I started having this happen. And a client of mine who is processing the death of her brother suddenly looked at me, complete shock, because he showed up in the room. And she was seeing him along with her baby sister, who had died when my client was 12 and the sister was 2. The brother was newly deceased. So she sees them and she's freaking out. She's going, what have you done to me? She's saying, what have you done to me? Like, I didn't do anything. What did you do to me? And what does this mean? And I said, well, what does it mean to you? So this is what's also important. The therapist does not interpret. The information, the wisdom resides in the client. So I don't say this is what this is. I say, what does it mean to you? And she said that they're together, they're okay, and I'll see them someday. And I just said, go with that. And I added bilateral stimulation so she can take in the message she's receiving. That was the first one that happened. I've had so many of these over the years, I can't even tell you. Yeah.
Wait on, let's stop there a moment there, because you have put out so much, and I just want to make sure. Yeah, there are a lot of one-liners that we could go into for the rest of the time, but let's just summarize some of these, because there are some really important themes. First off, you pointed to the fact that in psychotherapy, not only EMDR, but maybe especially EMDR, there is the possibility of deeper transpersonal spiritual experiences, one's way outside normal experience. And that's a possibility. But it's only a possibility with a particular kind of therapist, a therapist who's open to these possibilities. And you pointed to the incredible importance of self-limiting beliefs. And you spoke of them, of course, they're incredibly important for all of us, but you spoke of the importance of them for therapists. And there's a whole field of research, as you know, interpersonal expectancies, which basically says what you expect from other people is very likely to come true. And that our beliefs about ourselves are self-fulfilling prophecies, but our beliefs about others tend to be self-fulfilling prophecies too. And there's even a term for the limiting beliefs, the golem effect. That is, if you have negative beliefs about a person, they are likely to, there is evidence, they are likely to in some ways live into and express our limiting beliefs. So the importance of this in therapy, which is the central thing you've been emphasizing, so important. And you emphasized the similarities of some of what you're finding with, well, spiritual traditions from around the world, but particularly the shamanic tradition with its emphasis on drumming and oral stimulation as a key factor. And I love what you said towards the end there, and I want to make sure this doesn't get lost. The therapist doesn't interpret. Well, that's a radical idea for a lot of therapists. You know, that's not to say that interpretation can't be helpful at times, but the emphasis you give it, what does that mean for you, seems like so important.
I'm so glad you're emphasizing this, Roger. With EMDR, we don't make interpretations. Wow. This is absolutely essential, because this is funny. In my trainings, right, we're facilitating practice, and we say, we call it the magic duct tape. We go around and the therapist wants to do reflective listening, or they want to make an interpretation. And we say, we're going to put the magic duct tape on your mouth so you don't do that. We try to make a joke out of it, because therapists feel like they have to be doing something, and or they're not earning their keep, right? They're not earning the money for their session. It's like, no, it's more a shift into being rather than doing. And it's aligning with the wisdom inherent in the client and resonating with that. That's very powerful. I think when you feel the person who is your therapist is connecting to your higher self, your true self, your inner wisdom, and they're not constricting you and seeing you as your conditioning, right? So the way in which is like, I hold the wisdom, the truth, the clarity in the client, and I see where the hurt parts are. So I'm holding both simultaneously. But that's so powerful, because if you're with somebody and they're constraining you by, they're going, oh, well, this person has got this problem and this problem and this problem, and they're judging you, and you feel that, it really doesn't make you feel safe. But if they're aligning with your true self, that strengthens in that resonant field. I mean, this is where this interpersonal neurobiology, I think, is so important, because the client feels the therapist seeing them in their highest self. And when you feel that, trust evolves, and that comes foreground more, right? Instead of background, that comes foreground. And also the places where the holdings are also apparent. So, but they're not seen as defining who the person is. See, this is where non-dual spirituality and Buddhism and all of these things that are such important influences in my life is, you just see, and it's obvious that the conditioning does not define the person, because all of that dissolves out. It dissolves out, and they're left with their true self. But as you know, each person is unique. There's the unique expression that each of us has where this true self manifests. So there's that alignment with that. And what we find as a result of EMDR is that whatever the person's natural proclivities are start to be expressed. If they're a singer, they're singing. If they're a writer, they're writing. If they're a dancer, they're dancing. Whatever it is that is their natural expression will start to come forward. I had a woman
So
who was like,
creativity is enhanced.
it just comes out, whatever it happens
That's
to
huge.
be. It's just so fun. One woman I'd worked with who was a singer, but she wasn't singing because of the trauma from her background. She
Yeah.
started producing CDs and going on the road. And it was like, oh my God, you couldn't imagine that she never could do that before because it was so natural for her. So these are some of the things that I think are just so important. And then no interpretation, because so what I was saying in my training, I watched a therapist make an interpretation for the client that I'm thinking, oh, that was really smart. That was really an intelligent interpretation. And then she made the interpretation, and then she told the client to go with that. And it took her completely down the wrong road. It was completely wrong. And then we had to bring the client back and have them reconnect to themselves and then find what really was true. And I thought, no interpretations. It's really allowing that which is within the person to unfold as it needs to unfold. And as soon as you make an interpretation, you're disempowering your client. You're taking the power. And this work is all about empowering our clients, about helping them develop the sense, what I call a felt sense of truth, this inner knowing that we refer them back to over and over again. And that gets stronger. And then they live with that in daily life. They can then go, oh, this doesn't feel right, or this does feel right, because they've developed that strength inside. If the therapist is telling the client, they're taking the power away from them. They're the ones that hold the information. So it's all about inquiry, about redirecting the client back to themselves, helping them strengthen that part of themselves. So no interpretations. It's about inquiry.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize how radically different that is from so many therapies.
Oh, I know. You know, one of my big influences, Roger and John, is Alice Miller. Do you remember Alice Miller?
Oh, God, yes.
Child.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, every therapist should read this. When I was in graduate school in the 80s, we were all reading her. We were all recognizing ourselves in her description. And I just come back to her because what she was saying is that when the therapist, and I'm totally going to paraphrase because I haven't read this in such a long time, but so many people are injured growing up because in order to be okay and not be abandoned, they had to be who their parents wanted them to be. So in the process of doing that, there's an abandonment of self and going out and, who do you want me to be? How do you want me to be? What are my likes? What are my dislikes? All of that. And then what happens is a strong integrated sense of self doesn't develop because self is all dependent on the other. And there's always a fear of abandonment. If I don't do it right, I'm going to be abandoned. I won't be loved. I'll lose love. So what happens when you have a therapy that makes interpretations and has a theoretical structure that doesn't allow the person to know what they know and express what they know, you're re-injuring them the way in which they were injured as children. So it's not healing. And on the other way, a therapy that asks the client, what do you need? Or what are you experiencing? And refers them back and then is listening and attuning to them, that's profoundly reparative. And so because of my own childhood and my own mother, who was very much needed me to be her therapist, Alice Miller was revelatory to me because it was like, oh, that's what this is. And so I'm very sensitive when somebody imposes something on me or somebody else. I reject it and I feel it's a boundary violation. You know, I'm like, no, ask the person, don't tell them, discover what's true for them and help them discover what's true for them. So it's very strong in how I teach and what I feel is so important. And this kind of circles back to shamanic work because so much of the neo-shamanism takes the power and the shaman does the journeying for the person rather than teaching the individual to discover for themselves and to develop their own capacities. So I feel strongly that therapies that are empowering and help the person come to what their own truth is, their own inner guidance, are what or what I want to follow or what I'm interested in. Because we want people to become independent, not dependent on the therapist.
Yeah, I wanted,
yeah, go,
I wanted
John.
to, yeah, I wanted to share a experience when you said the after-death communication with a loved one. Well, I've talked about this, but I lost my older brother. We were very close to suicide in my house, and I was really, it set me on a downward spiral for 4 years. And I was taking psychedelic mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms one time, and I was just looking in the mirror, which is a powerful thing to do if you haven't done. I don't do this at home, kids. But in that experience, my brother showed up and he just said, "John, I'm okay. I'm better than I'm ever been. You don't have to worry about me." And I was just, "Oh, really? Thank God." And what happened is it really did heal. It wasn't just the experience, you can have these altered states where, really good things happen. But I can think about him now, and I can think about his suicide, and I can think about I'm probably more connected to him than almost any other family member in that way, because somehow it shifted, it got healed, and really a grace, and it's extraordinary. And I just wanted to share that because that stuff does happen. And
I'm so glad you shared it, and I'm sorry for your loss, because there's that connection with them, from the other side, but there's still the reality of the loss itself. One of the EMDR experiences that I've written about was a woman in my class. Again, I was doing a demonstration with her, and she wanted to be my demonstration subject. She jumped in front of me. This was at Omega, those of you who know Omega Institute. And she was filled with guilt and trauma. So she herself was probably in her 40s. When she was in college, her high school boyfriend had hung himself. And she didn't witness it, she heard about it, but she felt guilty. She felt bad about how they broke up. She felt responsible. She was filled with terrible guilt and trauma around this. She said she couldn't see a rope because that would activate the imagery that she created in her mind. And so what we did was we went in, and our EMDR target, so to speak, was how she imagined he died. So very often the person doesn't see it, but they've created in their mind a mental picture of that. So she created in her mind the mental picture of how he had killed himself, hanging himself. And so in this case, I was tapping on her knees. And so she's crying and sobbing and sobbing. And she said, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." And it felt like he suddenly shows up in the room, like the hair is standing up on my arms, and she hears him talking to her. And he starts saying, "It wasn't your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. I'm okay." All of these things. And so he's just communicating. And she's hearing him, and she's reporting some of what he just told her. And there was one part, I can't remember all of what happened, but we returned to the image of the hanging because there was still some of that left. And I said to her, "What's still there?" It's still, the rope was really disturbing. So we went with that. Again, I'm tapping her knees. I'm not doing anything in terms of directing her except for bringing her back and looking at what's still there. And so she says, now his name was Michael. Now it's like he's like a scarecrow, like a stuffed dummy. The body is not even his body, it's just a stuffed dummy. And his spiritual self, like his angelic spiritual self, now goes up to where the dummy is hanging and takes him off the noose, holds him, and he takes the rope and he goes like this. He flings it into the sky and it becomes a stairway. And he then climbs the stairway into the sky with this dummy, and they dissolve into light and they become stars. And she's sobbing, and I'm sure I'm crying too. And then she says, it was like it was gone. And she had a sense of him there
Yeah.
as a spiritual helping presence for her. The trauma was gone. There was a sense of complete forgiveness, but there really wasn't anything to forgive. None of it was connected to her. And the image of the rope was all gone. And this was in a group of people. Everybody is just crying and filled with this energy and this awesomeness, right? And I didn't do anything but tap on her knees and say, go with that, and look for where there might have been anything left. And she later wrote to me and she said, it might have been a year later or months later, giving me permission to present this. And she said that I now feel that he's a presence with me, a benevolent presence, looking at like a guardian angel kind of a thing. And the trauma of it is completely gone. It was such a beautiful experience of this. And what I want to say is I've had so many, many, many of these over the years in my trainings, myself personally, and a psychologist named Alan Botkin, who worked for the Chicago VA, working with post-traumatic stress disorder resistant veterans. I mean, they weren't healing. They had such trauma, mostly because they killed people. He began to spontaneously have these same kinds of experiences with his VA guys. And they were spontaneously happening. And then he wrote about it and he did research on it. Thousands of them he did. And then he developed a protocol for inducing after-death communications. And he has a book called Induced After-Death Communication. My feeling, so he and I have connected over the years. He was not a transpersonally oriented psychologist at all. All of this just was happening spontaneously in his work with these veterans. I believe he made a short film about this. He certainly wrote this book. And the difference between how he works and how I work is my goal isn't to induce any kind of experience. My goal is to help free the person from whatever is keeping them from living fully, right? And if they need to communicate something, then I'll facilitate that. But I'm not going to purposely look to induce a particular state of consciousness. So whereas he is more focused on that. But it's, again, he's done thousands of them. I don't know that he's still doing this. He may still be doing this. He's no longer working for the VA. But this was such validation, and I'm not the only one. So this is some of what these kinds of experiences that people are having that are really important for therapists to not shut down or to not interpret or pathologize or any of that, to just create the space for this to unfold and complete itself.
Whoa.
You didn't know this, Roger.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have written about these kinds of things in your quite a bit, and I don't doubt them. I mean, I've certainly had with you had some remarkable experiences myself. It's not those kind of communications. Those don't seem to come up for me, but I'm just again awed by the psyche or our human nature. I mean, we are so much more than we usually imagine. In fact, so much more than we probably can imagine. And again, coming back to your theme of the importance of open-mindedness, tolerance of, one could call it tolerance of ambiguity using psychological language, but it feels deeper than that. It feels like this is openness to the mystery.
That's it.
Yeah.
Tolerance that's like not the right word at all. It's really openness. I love that openness to the mystery. It's like, it's that don't know mind.
Yes, don't know. Sunsanim was the person you're thinking of,
That's
right?
it.
The
Don't know
Korean Zen
mind.
master. Only keep don't know mind. Yeah.
Don't know mind.
And so important for this. Again, one of the things that's has blown me away in recent years is just appreciating how powerful, well, first off, yes, how powerful limiting beliefs are about ourselves and other people, and how universal they are in all of us, and the importance and power of recognizing those. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to
Go ahead,
ask
John.
you, Roger. Uh, you're, a psychotherapist, a psychiatrist, a meditator of, years and years of experience in teaching meditation. What was it like if you don't have to do this if you don't want to, but I would just be curious, what was the issue that initially got you there? And what was your experience? And you kept going back for 20 years. So, and you said it opened up you to deeper spiritual experiences also. So can you say kind of phenomenologically what it felt like for you to go through this process?
Yeah. Well, in my case, it wasn't a specific issue that drew me to working with Laurel and to trying EMDR. It was, if this data is true, this is a revolution in trauma work. And so I was really curious. And of course, all of us have traumas. In my case, fortunately, rather small t traumas. But I can remember, for example, my personality has been conflict avoidant, hypersensitive to criticism, as we all have. And when I started exploring in therapy, in my therapies, I can't remember where I first explored. Well, what was that about? But I'd find if someone criticized me, the thought that would come up is, I'm bad, no one likes me. And then if I stayed with that, I go right back to a childhood experience, coming to school and finding a group of kids waiting to beat me up. And I had a session with that on Laurel, I had a session on that with Laurel. And I would say about immediately 50% of the interpersonal hypersensitivity dissolved. Complete. I still don't like it. People criticize me, but the reactivity is so much less. And it was so clear going into that experience, letting it process through, and experiences, old traumatic memories just process through faster with EMDR. Laurel's been saying that repeatedly, and that's my own experience. But what is so striking, and I think one of the things Laurel has introduced into in recognition in the EMDR world, is that there is the potential for that. For example, one can start with a traumatic experience, but as Laurel said, there's no way of knowing where it's ended. I mean, so many times I've gone into a experience, or it's just the end of a relationship, for example, and starting with anger or sadness, and ending up in some exquisitely beautiful transpersonal space once some of the charge around the relationship loss has been worked through. That's not necessarily as Laurel's been saying, that doesn't have to be the endpoint, which it is for most therapy and most therapists. Oh, great, you don't have so much charge around that. Wonderful. Okay, next problem. No, it can be an opening into a transpersonal experience. And I have to say, as Laurel said, I never know where these things are going to go. It's like often at the end of a session with Laurel, I became, well, I sure wasn't expecting that. So, of course, neither of us were, but that's the beauty. This openness to the mystery and openness to possibilities, and particularly working with a therapist such as Laurel, who has a very deep spiritual practice. So I can share my experiences and she can relate and resonate with them and point further or suggest further possibilities or different ways of looking at it and opening to it. So it's been it's been therapeutically healing to do this work, but it's also been spiritually opening. Both.
Thank you, Roger. That's really, really helpful. Appreciate that.
Something else I wanted to say, and I don't know how this is going to land, but there's something also very powerful about that connection with the client therapist connection, in that as the client is moving these constructs and all of this out, the therapist is also experiencing this moving out. So the places where so many of us have similar kind of receptor sites, if you want, or complexes that are still in our body minds, or places of holding. As the client is clearing them out, there's a reciprocal resonant healing process that is happening. So the client gets clear, the therapist is also clearing whatever is resonant in themselves. It is extraordinary. So I feel like a big part of my spiritual practice over, you want to say, for years has been this kind of healing, cleaning process that you have as you're journeying with your clients, because it's profoundly touching the therapist too. So when the client experiences the vastness of consciousness and the just that everything is exactly as it is in that big space, I'm experiencing that at the same time. It's like I'm having, it's like satsang, really remembering, but you're having this feeling that's all, it's a body-based full experience of that. And so over and over and over again, there's experience of, oh, here are these places in the person I'm working with. We work through them and it moves it out. And we're sitting there with this energy, this love, this whatever it is that we're both connected to. So there's a feeling of merging in this, the wonder of it all, if you want, the mystery. And there's nobody who's doing that. So this is where it facilitates, I think, the dissolution of the self-constructs in the therapist as well as the client. I think there's this connection that's happening, this resonant connection in the healing process.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And again, I'm reminded of Jung, who said, if the therapist, and some humanistic therapists would agree, if the therapist isn't transformed as well, then something's not working. And you pointed to the resonance between therapist and client, and that raises the question. Now, you've done a lot of spiritual work, so you have this capacity for opening to these states and experiences. And I know for myself that's been extremely beneficial, because I know that I can, share any of these experiences, and you'll get them and resonate, and be able to give feedback. But that's not true of a lot of therapists. So again, the question, to what extent does and I guess part of a more general question as part of therapy in particular, to what extent do our own limitations as human beings, as therapists, limit the capacity of our possibilities or potentials of our clients to open and heal, and particularly in this case, to open to profound spiritual experiences?
It's a good question, Roger, and I really don't know. I think if the therapist, I think, should have a basic meditation practice of sitting, of having that silent mind, being able to notice, basic Vipassana is so helpful to really disidentify with the thoughts and feelings and body sensations, and not imprison, not project that onto the client, that who the client is are their thoughts and the things that happen to them. So the extent to which the therapist can be present, I think presence is so important. All the distractions that people have, presence and a basic practice of watching thoughts, of coming back to the moment. I think that is kind of a baseline. And then the ability to be curious and not interpret, and allow what's unfolding to unfold without needing to define it or constrain it or to take the power, that kind of openness. And I think that the therapist over time doing this work with that orientation can begin to open to spirituality. I think it just happens on its own. I think. I don't know. But I think, and I think this is, we're all a work in progress. I think our whole life is about learning and unfolding and experiencing, and it's not like you're done, because something else is going to show up in your life that's going to throw you off, and you're going to go, okay, this is something else that I need to learn how to face or to be with or whatever it is. So So, but I think that when we have basic tools for doing that, we can refer back to that. And I think that really helps.
Laurel, is this a technique you can do alone at home?
EMDR.
Yeah, this however you want to do it.
Yeah. So I think that there's some things we can do on our own that we can
Mhm.
move them through. For example, a recent trauma, like you had a car accident, you're shaken up, you can do what I call tapping through the trauma. You can play the movie of what happened from beginning to end, the end meaning I'm okay, I survived. And you can use bilateral stimulation through that and really move it out of your nervous system. Things like that that have a scary thing and a positive resolution, you can use bilateral stimulation to move it out, for sure. You can also do what we call resource tapping or resource installation. This is where we call up resources that are going to be supportive of us. This is where partly how I've evolved EMDR is doing what we call resource installation or resource tapping. So Francine's way of doing EMDR was basically throw the person in the deep end and then they're going to survive and they'll get through it, which has not been good for a lot of people. It's given EMDR a very bad name because some people get through the trauma, but they've been traumatized by how they got through the trauma because it was so overwhelming for them. What I strongly believe in is strengthening people before we go in the big and do the big stuff. So what we do is what I call the 4 foundational resources. It's a peaceful place they can imagine that's peaceful and calm, that settles their nervous system. Nurturing figures. These are figures, real or imaginary, that have a nurturing quality. Protector figures. These are figures, real or imaginary, that are protective. It could be, a grizzly bear. It could be an action figure. It could be your protective adult self. And then wise figure, a figure that you can call on for wisdom. So we'll go through and we do what we call tapping in these figures. So they imagine a figure that is nurturing and kind and calm. It could be, let's say, an angel. They can imagine an angel and they imagine her and they feel her benevolence and her kindness and her compassion. And then they add short amount of bilateral stimulation. So with these resources, what's different between the resourcing and standard EMDR is with the resources, we focus it on what we're trying to cultivate and develop. So if we're wanting to cultivate these nurturing figures, we imagine the figure, we light up the neural network where that figure is activating. We get a good, strong sense of it, and then we use a short amount of bilateral stimulation. I wrote a book called Tapping In for Sounds True that's all about this. So you get a good, strong sense of the nurturing quality and the feeling of the figure, and you tap maybe 6 to 12 times or longer, as long as it's positive. And then you've got that figure. Then we move on to the next one and the next one. And so we end up with a team of figures as well as the peaceful place that are supportive of the work. And then we can even invoke them as a team. Can you imagine them all as a team? Oh yeah, I've got the Dalai Lama, I've got my best friend, I've got my dog that I had as a child, I've got the mother grizzly bear, I've got Nelson Mandela, I've got this amazing team of support that I've evoked in my imagination, and then I've got a feeling for them. So what this does is it creates a safety net for the process. If the person, when they're doing the big stuff, gets stuck, we can call in one of the resources for help. They're doing what we call looping. Their father is abusing them and they can't get out of the room and this terrible thing is happening. I'll stop and say, okay, what does your child need? I need protection. Who can do it? Oh, the grizzly bear. She can come in and scare him away. Okay, imagine that. Add bilateral stimulation. So we create these resources to create more support for the work, to create a safety net, and then we can use them if we need to, if the person is getting stuck in a bad place and they need to call in for help. So this technology of activating strong supportive resources, I've expanded into a whole other realm of way of working. And it works really well cross-culturally. I teach all over the world, and there's certain cultures that are really affect averse. Certain Asian cultures, Chinese, Singaporeans. I've been teaching in Singapore for years. It's just not in the culture to feel comfortable with strong affect. And so, but the resourcing, they love it. They can work really well with the resourcing. So there's all kinds of ways of working with imagery that is helpful and supportive and healing, adding bilateral stimulation to that links it into the fuller neural circuitry. So we think of, if a person is living with, I'm powerless, I'm powerless, I'm powerless, but we can evoke resources that have power, we light them up, we add bilateral stimulation, it links it into the fuller neurocircuitry, and the person doesn't feel so powerless. They have access to these inner resources that they didn't have before.
Yeah, Laurel, I want to advertise for your YouTube clip, because you did exactly what you're talking about in this particular thing. You know, she evoked the place where she felt safe, the people that could protect her, and all of these things. And you had a little clicker in your hand or something, it looked like.
Yeah. So that's equipment. Roger knows about this. It was a company called Neurotech Corporation. So they're little pulsers, and it comes with pulsers and headphones, and the pulsers vibrate. The person can put them under their legs, they can hold them, they can put them in their pockets, and the therapist or the client can control it, and it goes alternately, right, left, right, left, right, left, with a little buzzy feeling. And it can go faster, slower. You can set it to the pace a person likes. Some people just want to tap. They want to tap themselves like this, or the sides of their legs, or tap their toes. But these little devices are terrific. And so, yeah, that's what you watch. You watch me setting up her resources.
Yeah.
Is this the woman who was sexually abused by her grandfather, by the way?
I can't remember. I remember she brought in Mother Mary as one of her protective, compassionate healing sources. And
I don't know what's on YouTube.
yeah, anyway, it was very beautiful, very powerful, and you could just feel, what the Quakers call it, a gathered moment, where all this stuff comes together and something very important is happening. And you guys, and it had a picture, a camera on you and a camera on her, so you could see both. And really extraordinary bit. And it's not very long, like 5 minutes, and it's just like, it's very impressive. So everybody go to YouTube and watch this. I think it'll really explain and get you to feel even more what we're learning here.
Yeah,
so the resources can be used to prepare people and support them before doing the trauma processing work, but we can use it also as a standalone technique. So that's kind of what I was referring to. Go ahead, Roger.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in on a response to your question, John, about can one do some of these techniques by oneself? And I'm glad you got in before I did, Laurel, because you had a much better and fuller answer. But in my own experience, and I should say I did the EMDR training many years ago, so I have the neurotech equipment, and occasionally, periodically, try it on myself, but I've never found it as powerful as working with you. And that just makes, I can understand that in a lot of different ways, but that's my experience. But I have not tried some of these things you said, such as the installing protective or empowering figures. So obviously there are ways of using it that I haven't thought of that could be powerful, perhaps by myself. Laurel, clearly a major part of both your own personal life and a context and inspiration for your work with people is your own spiritual practice. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So I was attracted to spiritual practice from the time I was really little, and always questioning. I rejected Christianity as a child because it didn't make sense to me. I was making my mother define what the terms meant in the Lord's Prayer, and she couldn't do it. And I was a very scientific child and was like, what do you mean? What does this mean? And so when I was in high school, I was introduced to Tibetan Buddhism, and I felt like I'd come home. My teacher's name is Ken Grantham. He was a student of Tartang Tulku Rinpoche. And this whole idea of look within your own mind, of direct experience, completely spoke to me. So I then was reading Alan Watts and I'm trying to think of all the different people, Lama Govinda and some of the explorations of consciousness and the people who were writing during that time. It was Alexandra David Neal. And I did retreat with Tarthang Tulku in the basement of the Nyingma Institute way back when. This is the 70s, right? And then I met Lama Yeshe in, was it 1973, 74, something like that. I was introduced to him by a former student of his who had become a nun. And I felt a deep, direct connection with her. And then I did a 3-week retreat when I was 20 in Lake Arrowhead with Lama Yeshe. So for those of you who don't know Lama Yeshe was the embodiment of pure, blissful love. You'd sit with Lama and he'd blow your circuits out with so much love, your body couldn't hold it. It would just be tears streaming down my face, my chest blown open, and just in that space of pure love and delight and joy and silliness. And he could get extremely serious and kind of pull back to this wrathful side. So he was all of that. And I was so blessed to do multiple retreats with him as he came to America, to do multiple initiations with him. And he died in it's the 40th year of his passing. 40th year. And I was just a young mother. We cremated his body on the land in Boulder Creek. His students did. I sat in meditation as I breathed in the ashes of his body. It was profound and life-changing, all of that. And it was incredibly just so much grief and so much being blown away. And then all these intense dreams came afterwards of purification and merging with him and all of that. And so I'd lost my beloved teacher, but along the way, I'd also been introduced to Vipassana. So 1975, I did a retreat with Jack Kornfield and Joseph Goldstein, and I loved the Vipassana work. I just took to it. And I love the simplicity of it. The Tibetan practices were so complex, and I'm not a good visualizer. So they'd have these elaborate things, and I'm like, I can't see anything. But I could feel the presence of Lama. I could feel the energies, but I couldn't visualize. So it was just too much, too complicated. I couldn't do the practices well, but give me a place to sit in silence. I was so happy. And so I began to do mostly Vipassana retreats. Every year I do at least 2, 8-day retreats in Yucca Valley or Santa Rosa or somewhere mostly with Jack, often with, Joseph would come around and I'd sit with Joseph also. This went on for years. And then what happened was I got extremely concentrated. I could sit for hours without moving. And everything just dropped away in this purity of concentration. And then I got up to do some yoga. I laid down and everything dissolved into consciousness itself. I call it an inside out experience, and I didn't know what happened. I just know that I went away and then I kind of came back, but everything had disappeared as I knew it. It felt like instead of things coming from me, I came out of something. And then when I would sleep at night, I would just drop into pure consciousness all night. It would just be consciousness all night long. And then I had a really hard time coming out of the retreat. And then Jack mentored me. And he was on the phone with me on a daily basis because I couldn't function. All I wanted to do was meditate and drop into those silent spaces. Then what happened was Vipassana didn't make sense anymore because there was no longer a path. So why are you practicing? You're practicing for something. The path had disappeared completely. All there is now. And so I felt a little bit lost because, and I didn't have anybody to really understand or explain what had happened, because it's not supposed to happen on an 8-day retreat. It's only supposed to happen on 3-month retreats. I've never done a 3-month retreat.
Talk about
So
limiting beliefs.
it was really a limiting belief. So I kind of didn't have direction. And then I met Jean Klein. So Jean Klein, an Advaita master of non-dual spirituality, and I met him through a colleague, and he was very hard to understand. He had a very strong German accent, but this quality of silence and presence was so strong. Just in his presence, my mind would stop and I would drop into that silent nowness. And so long story short, I began to do retreats with Jean, and in one of them at Santa Sabina here in San Rafael, I had an interview with him, and he told me to let go of all concepts, everything. He was very direct about that. And that night, as I lay down, everything dissolved. All the constructs. A thought would come and it would just disappear. So all night long, there was the arising and the disappearing and the dissolution of everything until there was just that. And in the morning, everything had dissolved into, in recognition of the isness, I call it a lucid isness, that's ever present in everything. And they talk about this as like the light that is the light that illumines the film. So you see the film. Well, that was completely obvious to me. And it was completely obvious that everything is that. It was like, oh yeah, this has always been there. It's the most obvious thing in the world. Yet you can never touch it. It was like, it was all obvious, but everything had disappeared. So the mantras I'd been doing, the practices, everything was gone. Everything was gone. And this was probably in the 80s, probably late 80s, early 90s. So, and then there was a bit of a struggle to kind of readjust to what is important in life, because everything else was seen as just a constructed belief. So I felt like I had woken up from the dream, but everybody else was dreaming still. And that's a kind of a lonely experience. And it wasn't joyful. It was hard. So then over time, it's like, what is important? And what is important is love, service, connections with people, the work that I was doing in terms of therapy. It kind of got distilled out. And family. I mean, there's not a lot, and there's no idea of projection into the future. It's like you make a plan, it's just a plan. You create an idea, it's all just seen as ideas. So there was that. And then Jean was amazing and wonderful. And then he passed away. And then this new person showed up who was incredible. And this is Suzanne Siegel. I don't know if you remember or know Suzanne Siegel. Suzanne Siegel was a psychologist. She wrote a book called Collision with the Infinite. She had had an experience of a personal self completely dropping away at a bus stop in Paris. And then she spent time completely lost, because every time she looked for herself, there was nothing there, and she'd get freaked out. And then all this fear would arise. So she met Jean Klein. He instructed her not to look within anymore and to just live. And so she then said what came was the springtime, was just this joyful living moment to moment. And so a group of us began to meet with her. I saw her, I think, every week individually. And then a group of us would meet with her, a group of therapists. And she made the experience of that, which always is, a completely normal, regular experience. And some of what the sitting, so I would sit with her, I drop into the space of nowness, the resonance in what she lived in, and I could see the places of holding. I call them tinker toys in the vastness, because I could see the constructs. It was like I could see them. And then in the seeing of them in her presence, they would dissolve. And then there would just be this. I had so many of experiences of this, and it was just normal. We were just girlfriends in the vastness, as she would say. We were all just friends playing in this that we always are. Ordinary experience of this. It's something, it's not special. It's just who we are. And she just normalized that. And I was so blessed to have so much time with her. And then she died of brain cancer. It was at the time of the Hale-Bopp comet coming through the sky. She passed away at that time. It was, we had her in our life for 6 months and then she was gone. It was devastating and also so profoundly grateful to have had her as a teacher. So these were the main teachers in my life. And the way, the way of working is just, again, none of the stuff that shows up in clients is who they are. Essentially, it's just these obvious contractions or, constructs that can be seen and known and dissolved. But the EMDR rapidly allows these things to move out. Again, anything that isn't true self just will evaporate, will just dissolve out. So I was kind of, living a normal life. And then 4 years ago, a horrifically terrible thing happened. And I'll speak of it. And so my 41-year-old son was murdered in his San Francisco apartment, and he was dismembered. And I had a sense that something was wrong. It was at Easter. I couldn't contact him. I won't go into details. I don't want to traumatize anybody hearing this. I ended up hiring a private investigator. We discovered who did it. They finally got access to his apartment. And then all of this started to unfold of what had happened. And then we ended up with homicide investigation, all kinds of, really extreme stuff. But what I know is that I know, and I knew at the time, that everything was exactly as it should be. I have no argument with life. I went into the space of this intense vibrational field and this sense of being held by everything at the same time, that it was horrible. It was horrible and exactly essential okayness. It's hard to describe that. And along the way, and I can't even remember the chronology, I knew that I needed to get help for him. I needed to get help for him, and I needed to get help for me and my family, because you don't want to die in this way. It was a friend of his who went crazy on meth and did this to him. And the police had already killed him. The guy who killed my son was already killed by the police, but they hadn't connected the two crimes together. Myself and my family and my friends, we made that connection for the police. There was so much incompetence, it's crazy. But so the perpetrator was dead. There was no longer any, they had to really confirm that. But I knew this isn't a good thing. However, my son was visiting people. He was showing up in dreams. He was showing up in visions. His former girlfriend is channeling him. She'd never done this ever before. He's communicating, saying, "Mom, it's great. You're right. I'll see you again. It's not your time yet." But he was like ecstatically happy about where he was. And people were reporting he was visiting. But I was having dreams of having to assemble pieces, that there was like puzzle pieces were scattered, and I needed to get them together. And I knew that it's not a good thing to die in that way. It's just not. The Tibetans, all the different, traditional practice, this is not a good way to go. So I put out the word to my community that I needed a shaman, I needed a spirit helper, I needed somebody for him, for me, for my family. And I found somebody. This is the synchronicity that was like, I felt like, as horrible as this was, there was all this grace happening. Our homicide detective was an African-American lesbian Buddhist. Really. The woman who cleaned his apartment was a former social worker, African-American woman filled with love, who purified the space. Oh my God, it was like, who gave me a big hug when she delivered his things to me. I mean, it was like all these amazing, beautiful things were happening at the same time. So anyway, I found the spirit worker. Her name is Jean Schneider, and she was amazing. What happened was so dark, a lot of spirit workers, shaman people don't want to get close to it. It's too bad, too awful. She specializes in that kind of stuff. So she did this work. She did work at night. She did all this work for him. And what she told me completely confirmed what I was feeling. And I don't understand this. So I don't come with a cosmology like this. This is like, okay, this is making sense, but I don't know how, because I don't have a cosmology like this. But she said he had 5 different soul parts. One of them never had incarnated, and that's why he couldn't make good choices in his life to protect himself. One had crossed over and was really happy. Another was visiting friends and family. Another one was still in the apartment. And another one was attached to the man who killed him, trying to help him still. So over time, she worked to help all of these different parts cross over together. It was integrated. And she helped clear some of the darkness that had contributed to why all this happened. In the meantime, my dreams changed into I'm no longer having these dreams of frantically trying to get something put together. And other people stopped having dreams of him visiting. It felt like she'd accomplished that. So then it really came back to me. He was in a good place. I needed to heal from my experience. I did EMDR on myself to process through the trauma of this with bilateral simulation. And I kept hearing him in my head saying, don't focus on it. Don't focus on it, meaning what happened to him. Don't focus on it. So I kept hitting delete. This is where mindfulness practice is so very helpful. Delete, 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 because that's not where he was. He was no longer there. This terrible thing happened, was no longer happening. Don't focus on it. And I had asked the woman who cleaned the apartment where all this happened for a photograph of the clean apartment, which she sent me. So now I had a new picture to replace the old one. It's clean. None of that's happening anymore. And I process it through. So I never had nightmares or flashbacks about what happened to him because I think of the EMDR part that I had done for myself. So what happened was I had been working with Jean for the past 4 years, almost 4 years, in first my own healing, and then in learning how to work with multiple dimensions of reality. So what I've learned about, it's kind of like what happened is, I didn't even realize this, is I think I had a limited view of time. My sense of time has expanded into multiple dimensions. And my sense of reality has also, and I suspect I never did psychedelics until more recently with an experience in the Amazon, but it's never been something I was attracted to. But I feel like in a way it's opened that multidimensionality. And so I recognize that sometimes what will happen is energies will attach to us that don't belong to us, or we're carrying something from our generations. I began to carry stuff from and recognize that I was holding traumas from people who are not my people, like others who have lost children. I was carrying some of that I needed to release. And so I've just learned so much about working with spirit attachments, with ancestral trauma, with intergenerational trauma, with what I call energetic sovereignty. And so part of what happens with our work with clients, and this is the limited view that therapists bring, is that everything that they're experiencing, we attribute to things that have happened to them in their life. This happened from your childhood, you're carrying this or that, right? Well, there are times when what the person is carrying does not belong to them. It could be something they're carrying from their grandparents, their great-grandparents, something in their lineage. It could be something that they were around somebody and something from that person entered in and is attached to them energetically. It could be something, and I hate to call it spirit possession or entity possession, but it's a kind of energetic attachment. And if a therapist is looking always for what belongs to the person and doesn't recognize there are other things that are possible here and doesn't do really good inquiry, then they're going to be attributing all of these kinds of things to something that happened to the individual. And so this is where this broader view of what's possible to be happening is really important. I can give you an example of what happened to me more recently, and some people are just more sensitive to this. After October 7th, with the Hamas terrorist attack in Israel, I had a horrible experience. I felt so traumatized, and I felt like I was in Israel. Now, what happened is horrific for sure, but my reaction to it felt personal. And it felt overwhelming, and I couldn't function, and I was dissociating all over the place. And I was like, I can't even be in my body. I don't know what this is about. So in exploring it with Jean, I found out that I had dead people connected into my system. Really old dead people. I had one was from like biblical times, and one was more recent. And we needed to do work to help release these beings because they had attached to me for some reason. And we did the work. They released, they were able to cross over. And all my symptoms went away. And thought, okay, I've had multiple experiences of this. And now I'm able to recognize this in terms of inquiry with clients, like, okay, does this feel like it's yours, or does it feel like it's not yours? You know, just basic inquiry rather than interpreting. Some of my concern about some of the ego state work or IFS is the assumption that everything somebody's experiencing is part of them. And then the work is to integrate it. Oh no, you don't want to integrate something that isn't yours. And in some cases, what we do is we make whatever is attached kind of the client and inquire what they need. Why are they hanging around? What are they looking for? And help them. So this is some of the cutting edge stuff that I'm involved with right now, is really this kind of broader perspective of what might be going on and helping people in bigger ways.
Excellent.
Oh, thank you very much. That's extremely emotionally powerful, and almost hesitate to get into the concepts around it, because the emotional power of what you're describing and have experienced and are transmitting is so very potent. And just a deep bow to your to the fact you're able to open to that, be with it, and hold the vast perspective of hesitate to call it okayness, but you did in the face of such an horrific challenge.
I think part of what, so in this evolution of understanding, so shamanic work, my experience of it in the past from a friend who did some of that, it was all about her doing the journeying for me. And it felt like a power differential. She'd come back with information that she conveyed to me, and I didn't know if it fit or didn't fit. Some of it was nonsense, really. And this way of working is all about empowering the individual and asking them and helping them develop what they need. And the use of these resources is so part of it. It's like, so the resourcing that we do in EMDR, we also can develop our spiritual resources that are there for us. They can be ancestral resources. They can be spiritual resources. It's so part of the Tibetan technology, right? Is cultivating and developing these very powerful deities that are within us, but they're also I suspect, on other dimensions. So it's recognizing that these things are there and they can be used to help us. And everybody has different ones that they resonate with. And so it's really using that information, and it's kind of coming back to the Tibetan technologies and the deities that are within and without, but also recognizing, and I think this was my confusion about all of this, is that everything has that same consciousness. There's no separation from it. So that consciousness that illumines everything on all dimensions. It's seamless. It's part of everything. So I think I didn't understand that before. And I'm coming back to, within Buddhism, there's skillful means. We use skillful means for cultivating certain types of consciousness, for helping in healing, for different things. So really what I'm developing are skillful means. It's not how to become enlightened, right? It's more, how do we support a person who has something that's blocking them from living fully, and what might those things be, and how can we, using skillful means, help them with that? So it's more, and everything is part of the same consciousness. So that's where it's not in conflict with non-dual spirituality at all. It's part and parcel of all of that.
Yeah. Again, so much in what you said, and just to touch on a few of them. One, where you've mentioned a couple of times. Well, assuming it's part of the client is as most therapists would do, can be perhaps a trap. And it, of course, from one perspective, it's like, well, what's the client? If the client is this little psyche, then that's one thing. If who we really are is the universal mind, then well, maybe it is. But it's a big difference. Another thing you said, well, you talked about and I really never thought of this, but it's you've given a whole new perspective. I dove deeply into shamanism at one stage, even wrote a couple of books on it, but it never occurred to me. Now I've had another flash of blinding insight into the totally obvious, is that, for some people it can be disempowering. And I think one of the valuable evolutions as shamanism has been introduced to the West, particularly by Michael Harner in the so-called core shamanism or neo-shamanism, is the shift towards everyone journeys. So that's a major shift. It's like now, thanks to Michael Harner and a number of other people, the shift has been that the recognition almost everyone has the potential for journeying and can access valuable insights and do it with remarkable rapidity. It doesn't require sitting on a cushion for weeks or months or even years. It can often happen within a single drumming session, as it can often happen within a single EMDR session. The other thing I just want to note in what you said is the development of skillful means. And in Buddhism, of course, there are two kinds of wisdom. There's prajna, which is insight into the fundamental nature of experience and existence. And the other is skillful means, learning how to be an optimal teacher and contributor. And beautiful. And often they come, they're separate skills, let's say that. Just because you have deep insight, prajna, doesn't mean you know how to teach. So you're talking about developing this capacity seems very important. Yeah.
I wanted also just to thank you for the depth of your sharing. I feel so honored that you were willing to go there with us and everyone here. And I've struggled with the darkness also, and you call it depression or dark night of the soul. The literature on both sides fits. And I've also realized that a lot of the darkness of things I'm working with are not just mine. It's collective. It's the whole family, and what's going on. And I get open to that. And it's a blessing or a curse, but I just have to be present with it and go there. So anyway.
Well, part of what I'm learning, John, is energetic sovereignty. And it's so important because I think part of what happens when we're empathic and we're healer type people is we merge with others and we take on what is in them. And so this is the whole thing where we work with what we call the energy bubble. We have our energy bubble and the others have theirs. But what I discovered I was doing is I was merging my bubble with other people's bubbles. That was how I was using my intuition and my empathy. And it was causing me to burn out. So I don't need to run their energy through my nervous system. I can have my energetic sovereignty and theirs, and I can feel with them without the merging. And then we can help others without running it through our system. And this was such a powerful learning for me. And then really working with the intergenerational stuff, because I think part of what we can get caught in, this is also my view of time, it's just gotten much broader. This whole thing of time is that in families, there can be periods of time of great trauma and difficulty. And we look at what Jewish people, what African Americans are bringing, what Native Americans are bringing in, all this intergenerational trauma, as well as European Americans. But what we have is a period of time of great trauma. But if you go back thousands of years, further back, you can always find resources and healthy, whole ancestral lineage. So if we go back further back and we discover where the healthy ancestry is, we really connect to that and then bring that forward energetically through our energetic cords, so to speak. We bring that forward. We can begin to heal the ancestry that's more current. So this is this whole idea of we can get lost in the soup of the trauma, but we can also find what's healthy and wholesome also in that ancestry, and then really connect with that and bring that forward. Even if we don't remember it, we can get a felt sense of that and we can find it and we can bring it forward. This has been revelatory. It's just been, for me, I think I carry the trauma of women being burned and murdered for their healing and their wisdom. And so this is where Christianity came into Europe. So my ancestry is Northern European, right? And Christianity murdered the people who were connected to the land and the spiritual dimensions. They were either you convert or you die. And so there is a deep fear. I don't feel it so much anymore, deep fear of speaking out what my truth is about these things, that I'll be killed. But if I go back far enough to a sense of a time when there was this connection to the earth and to the spirit world and all of that, as they still have in the Amazon, by the way, in many indigenous places, they still have this has been unbroken. Find that, get a sense of that, connect to that, maybe use bilateral stimulation to strengthen it, and then imagine bringing that forward through the ancestry. It can begin to bring this healing sense and a sense of hope. Again, that's a broader sense of time than we carry, because we tend to get stuck in what we remember, what family members remember. So look for where the healthy, wholesome ancestry is, connect to that, and then bring that forward, either through imagination, get a felt sense of it, tap that through, really strengthen that. So this is the stuff that excites me, because we can focus either on the traumas, where if it's too much, you really can get bogged down and it just feels like it's infinite. There's so much. Mm-hmm. Or we can look for where there's positive, wholesome, healthy resourcing in the ancestry, get a felt sense of where that exists. Even if you don't think or have pictures of it, you get a feeling for it, focus on that, tap that in, and then bring that forward. So this is where it's the same with the EMDR. We can focus just on the traumas. Well, some people can't do that because it's just too much. We need to strengthen them and resource them before, and then maybe we can do the trauma work. We can also target with EMDR the traumas that are within the ancestry. When you think of what happened to your grandmother or your great-grandmother or your father or somebody, and you're holding in your mind and in your nervous system the trauma of that, you can target and reprocess that. And it clears it out. And then you feel free from that. So there's so much of it that we can work on. Some people, we use what we call the bridging technique from a current present day symptom, and it doesn't go to this lifetime. It goes to a past life. And then we just reprocess that as we would anything with the EMDR, and then their symptoms go away. But they've been carrying that in their system. And I don't know how this works. All I know is it does. So again, I'm not interpreting. I'm not even saying this is really a past life. I don't even know. In fact, one of the video demonstrations I have is working with a man who, when we did this work, he connected to an image of a 4-year-old that he identified as himself right before he was killed in the Holocaust. And he was about to be, I think, sent to the ovens or something. And I felt like I was with him during this process. And we processed through it. And there was this kind rabbi who looked him in the eyes, who gave him love. And then he saw all the kindness around him. And then he imagined dying. Well, I felt like I was part of that whole thing. It was really uncanny. And in the end, he felt clear this thing that had been, it was like a separation between him and life. He couldn't fully engage in life because he had this thing that he was carrying with him. And so he and I both felt like this was a past life that we had just reprocessed. Now, I'm wondering if this was his past life or if this was a being that had attached to him whose past life it was. Interesting. Who we had processed that past life of this 4-year-old who had died, that had attached to him, and then he was able to cross over as a result of that work. This is where I'm like, oh, some of what I thought was past life work for the individual I was working with turns out very likely it was for the being that had attached to the person who had been living in their body. This sounds really out there, I know. But when we did the work, it freed the being, they crossed over, and the symptoms went away for the person that I was working with. Even if I didn't know what I was doing, I just did my usual thing, and it worked. Oh, now my understanding of what I did is changing a bit. So anyway.
And the beauty of it and the power in part is that you're holding it all and don't know mind.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I'm not making any interpretations. I'm just asking, what do you need? Who can help you? And, what are the blocks and how might we unstick this? And I always refer back to the individual. So I'm not interpreting any of it. I'm just really staying open, but I'm also staying open to the multiplicity of possibilities of what this could be. So I'm not saying this is you and we got to integrate this. It's like, I don't know.
Yeah. And it's a beautiful example of the way your own worldview has expanded as a result of your openness to the experiences in your clients. And I think it's one of the most dramatic experiences I've heard of therapists being transformed by the experience of the people they work with. The only the analogy that comes to mind is the original psychedelic therapists. It was part of a research project that interviewed them and some of those great pioneers, and a lot of them described changes of the kind of order you're describing. I mean, they started as Freudians or something like that, and they ended up as transpersonal transpersonalists. And some of them went kicking and screaming along the way, but they were open-minded enough to acknowledge first they were dealing with a mystery. Second, the psyche was, I'll call it psyche, like the human psyche is far more profound and mysterious and bottomless than our little traditional psychology assumes. And that there is a wisdom in the psyche that given trust and open awareness, the psyche turns out to be self-correcting, self-healing, self-actualizing, self-transcending, and self-liberating.
I love it. Beautifully said, Roger. Beautifully said. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's amazing. And there's like a convergence. The psychedelic pioneers discovered this, and then it got lost. You're rediscovering it with your EMDR work. Hopefully, this coming generation of psychedelic therapists will rediscover it, as they probably are, and hopefully it will filter into our mainstream psychology and open it to a much larger and transpersonal perspective.
And it's allowed you to have the medicine that you have, that you can be the power of the healer. It's like, it ain't easy, but it's coming through you, and you've just stayed with your process. And Jesus said, wherefore by their fruits you shall know them, and he says a bad tree doesn't produce good fruits, etc. So it's like, yeah.
And, and I want to say, and grief is still there, part of what had happened in my process was I could not lift the sadness. Sadness was with me all the time. And, with everything I was doing, it wasn't lifting. So
Yeah.
I thought I want to go into a deep nature experience. So I journeyed to the Ecuadorian Amazon with an organization called Pachamama Alliance, and spent some time with the Sapara people and had a healing with a shaman. His name was Minari, and I had no idea this is what was going to happen at all. I thought I just wanted to connect with nature, that connect with interconnectedness of life, which I had felt before in the Peruvian Amazon. It's profound. It's like you're going to the source of everything with that. But he did this healing with me of using tobacco smoke and chanting and clearing, and he lifted it off of me. And he told me that my son was there with me. It was like he was like my protector. And he said that I was a healer. I mean, all of these things. He gave me the name Shamina, which is female shaman, but he lifted it off of me. And before I couldn't feel joy or happiness. I could live. I was living through it, but I couldn't feel that. And after that experience, I could again. So he didn't teach me how to do what he does, but he did this for me. So it's like recognizing that there are other ways of healing that are old, that have been around for thousands of years. And that part of my work as a teacher healer is to learn as much as I can to be able to teach and to convey this to other people. So that was the other piece of my own healing journey, was that. And grief is still there. It's not all the time, but the anniversary of his death, it's very intense. His birthday is intense. His, Christmas, there's certain places when it's like, it feels like it just happened again. And that's also a learning for me, because I've worked with so many people over the years who've lost people, but the loss of a child is a very different experience.
Mm.
It's really like a piece of you is gone. And, but I feel like I also dream of him, and I have such vivid dreams. It's like I'm seeing him, like we're having ordinary conversations. It's never anything really special. It's just, we're just hanging out, and it's lovely. And it's, not as frequent as it was earlier on, but I feel like he's not that far away, but he's on his own journey wherever he is, and he's in a good place. In fact, my granddaughter, after a surgery she had, spontaneously went and visited him on the other side. She just put her hands together, her feet together, and she just went through a tunnel, and suddenly she sees him and she's hugging him, and they're having a great time. It's like, oh my God. So, and she brought back, she said, I'm not supposed to go very often. This isn't good. I can see him if I want to. There are other ancestors there. This was an 11-year-old.
Wow.
Who had this happen. So, whoa. So, okay. He's there. Yeah. I don't want to pull him back, but he's in a good place, and he'll be there when it's my time. I just feel like he'll be there too.
Wow. Beautiful. Mm.
And grief is there too. This is the thing about Suzanne Siegel would say, and there's fears there too, and grief's there too. And it's like, it's a sense of consciousness is so vast that it includes everything. And that just because something's there doesn't mean that consciousness isn't there too. So there is this kind of reductive sense that if this is there, then this can't be there.
Yes, yes.
And so I'm like, okay, this is, and grief is there too.
Yeah, and as you would know from your own deep Tibetan Buddhist work, in some traditions, not all, but in some traditions, there's a there's a recognition that, and I'll speak for Tibetan Buddhism, that of what's called primordial purity, the recognition that at a fundamental level, everything is an expression of consciousness, and nothing needs to be condemned. Discernment, yes. Discernment, and there's a problem with the word judgment, which we use, because judgment has two different meanings. One is condemnation, and the other is discernment. Condemnation leads to anger, attack, etc. Discernment leads to wisdom. And the discerning aspect of primordial purity is the recognition that it's all an expression of consciousness. Nothing need be condemned, but one can certainly discern. Something should be cultivated, some should be let go.
And also then you bring curiosities like, oh, I wonder what that is.
Right.
I wonder what that is. So instead of like, I shouldn't be feeling this because that means I'm a bad Buddhist or I'm a bad whatever. It's like, oh, I wonder why this is arising what now? And then it can bring this kind of inquiry and then go, like, okay, where's that coming from? Is this mine? Is it not mine? You know, is this something that needs to be worked with or not? So it's just like that kind of non-judgmental, open curiosity that allows for things to be explored. But it's not like I have to do this to be a better person. That whole,
Yes.
Becoming a better person project is just, I don't want to feel anger. And then you just know if I feel anger and hatred and any of this, it's like, that feels like poison in my own nervous system. Why would I want to be carrying that around? It's not just bad for others. It's like I'm carrying toxins. How do I relieve this so that, and then EMDR is a great way to begin to be able to, allow that to come to awareness and then see where it comes from and to allow it to be cleared out, to be cleansed.
Yeah. And one thing I want to just touch back into, because you've mentioned it a couple of times, and you've opened just this conversation has opened my understanding of cross-generational transmission. We hear a lot about transmission of trauma, but you also point out, you've implied, and you write about it specifically, there can be a cross-generational transmission of limiting beliefs. And what you pointed to in our conversation is there can be a cross-generational transmission of positive qualities and virtues, and that doesn't get emphasized so much. So thank you.
Yeah.
This is what's really exciting to me. I think this was a big shift in we're so trauma focused and we're not resource focused enough. And, some of my thinking was, why, how would I put it? For African Americans, for example, why haven't some families not talked about what happened in the family? Why has there been an avoidance of some of this? Same with the indigenous peoples. And I realized, it's because it's too much trauma. It's overwhelming trauma. Who wants to hear about all the horrible things that were done? It's overwhelming. And so I go, because I was listening to the book Warmth of Other Suns. I think that's the title of it. It's about the Great Migration of African Americans to the north and to the west. And I got overwhelmed. There was so much horror that I couldn't read it anymore. And I realized this is what's happening. When you have so much trauma in your ancestry, you can't deal with it. And then it begins to define you. I'm living with this. It's living in my nervous system. Okay, but if you go back far enough, let's go back 3, 4, 5, 6, however, go back and look for what's healthy in the ancestry. Maybe we go back to Africa. Maybe we go back to, wherever that is and look for it and connect to that and then bring that forward. I think this is a real key to what can help us. Same with Native Americans or the First Nations people, the Native peoples of the Americas, where there's been so much horrific intergenerational trauma. It's still ongoing. Let's find the way people were living and being pre-colonization. let's find that, connect to the traditions, the wisdom, their spirituality, take that in, soak that in, and then bring that forward. It's almost like the way I think of it is these energetic conduits, right? Think of them as energetic cords, energetic pathways. We have good and bad things. In my own ancestry, I have very strong women, but they're not very nice women. they're like tough as nails, but mean, like cruel, mean, not nice, but strong. So I didn't want to let that through. But you can make a choice. This is what's so cool. You can say, okay, I want to invite in through these energetic pathways, the strong, the powerful. Let me let that through. And the stuff that isn't helpful or wholesome or good for me, I can imagine that getting composted. Let that go into the earth and get composted rather than coming through into me. Same with anything. We can take in the wisdom, the power, the good stuff, and we can say, okay, this stops here with me. We can compost this, or we can, however the person wants to imagine it, we can take this into the light, or we can bring in a resource figure who can transmute it.
Yeah,
People
that's
will
exactly
imagine different things, right? So it can go into the earth and compost and disintegrate and be gone, feeding the plants. But I want to take in the power and the strength of these women that were amazing, coming through in covered wagons where her husband died along the trail and she kept going with 5 kids and settled in the Texas Panhandle. This is my great grandmother. She was incredible, mean as can be, but probably traumatized all her kids, but she was so strong. So this is the stuff I can let in without the bad, the stuff that I don't want. So that was like, oh, I can discern, I can make a choice. That's really cool, right?
Whoa.
So
Laurel,
getting a taste as to what I've been interested in more recently. Yeah.
this is wonderful, and thank you. And it's beautiful to see that you have created a therapy, or co-created a therapy, which is not only perhaps uniquely helpful with trauma, but you have learned both your own experience and learning with your clients how to use it to strengthen positive qualities as well, and how to draw on resources, multiple resources, inner and ancestral, and from who knows where.
Yeah.
And I love that you're doing all within the context of Don't Know Mind.
Yeah.
We're probably coming towards the end of our time, but is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think what's important is also service and the intention for what we do. And this is where I've had trouble with some of the shamans and shamanic practices, where there haven't been good boundaries, there hasn't been good ethics, it hasn't been in the service of healing for the sake of all beings kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
It can be the taking of personal power, the ego inflation that can happen with some of that. So it's really that setting the intention that this is for the sake of all beings, it's for healing, it's for liberation, and then having proper ethics and boundaries. Because part of what happens when you get into the multidimensional area, people lose their sense of ethics and boundaries. And there's all kinds of boundary violations and people getting hurt. So it's like coming back to our professional ethics, to good boundaries, good practices. It's the psychedelics has turned into the Wild West. People are getting hurt as well as helped. So it's like coming back, grounding ourselves, using our ethics, having good boundaries. And then really it's the purpose is for service. I just think this is just so very important in what we're doing.
Yeah. Well, beautifully said. And going back to your Tibetan tradition, and mine too, of the idea that everything rests on the tip of the needle of intention.
Yeah.
That intention is so crucial, and the refinement, the purification of one's intention, the examination, reflection, etc., is just such a crucial practice for soul. And it's just been such a delight to have this kind of conversation, and thank you for opening so deeply, both personally and about your work and the pioneering aspects you're discovering. This has truly been a gift for John and me and for our listeners. So thanks so
Yeah.
much.
And it brings to me like the Lakota prayer, which is something like, Great Spirit, have pity or mercy on me that my people may live. Like all of this stuff and this healing we're doing, it's not just for us, that my people may live. And that grounds it. That's the key.
Yeah. It's this broader perspective that's going to take us into the future, into the generations that come, and holding all of this with great love and compassion. And I just want to thank the two of you for letting me share what's been unfolding in my life in ways that I haven't shared in this way before. This is continuing to unfold, which is, let this be a benefit to others, that would be wonderful.
Thank you.
I don't think there's any question it will be a benefit to others, and sounds like we should get you back in a couple of years and find what the new edge is. May you and we all continue to unfold, and thank you so much for the
Thank you
wonderful
so
work
much,
you're
Laurel.
doing, Laura. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Okay.